making games is never an exact science. It's more of an art than a science. It's really hard to do, and I think it helps understanding what makes games good, what makes games great. Involving community early on within the game design and development process is becoming more and more important. Giving people more agency and more ownership about who they are and who they want to be is always going to be a good thing, and it's always going to be something that's desirable. I get excited when a team comes to me with an idea for a game where the game would not work at all if blockchain didn't exist, like without the blockchain.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of NEWFORUM. And we are the Web3 podcast driving culture forward, and we are powered by New Foundation. And our aim is to spark informative and educative conversations on the topics of crypto, NFTs, DAOs, DeFi, and the metaverse. And on today's episode, I'm super happy to have with me Nico Veerecke. He's an investor at BITKRAFT Ventures, where he works with founders at the intersection of blockchain and gaming. Nico is deeply curious about how new technologies can help build great games. He founded The Future of Gaming, a DAO that explores just that. And previously, he spent 5 years building multiple startups in the crypto space. He's also working with BITKRAFT, and they invested in projects such as Discord, Epic Games, Disco, and Avalanche. Hi, Nico. I'm happy to have you on today.
Hey, hello. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, so to start things off on a very light note, I want to ask you, Nico, what was your favorite game growing up?
That is a good question. I'll tell you the first game that I really remember, and that was Pokemon. My grandparents gave it to me. It was in French because they were living in France at the moment. I'm not a French native, and so I played through that whole game without understanding anything that was going on. It took me a while to get through. But I guess like my favorite game, the game that I just remember being way too into, was a game called RuneScape. It's this browser-based MMO. And I remember when I was in middle school, waking up at 4:30 in the morning just to get a few hours of RuneScape in, just to do a bit of mining, a bit of woodcutting. So yeah, I would say both of these games come to mind.
So were you like growing up somebody that spent like 6 to 7 hours? Because I remember my brother, when he had a gaming session, he would spend like sometimes 6 to 7 hours playing these games. And I'm wondering, how did that influence your perspective on games?
I would say that, if my parents didn't drag me away from my computer, I could spend an easy 12 hours on a weekend there. Similarly in evenings. How that changed my perspective on what I do today, I guess, as a games-focused investor. I think it's making games is never an exact science. It's more of an art than a science. It's really hard to do. And I think, it helps understanding what makes games good, what makes games great. And yeah, I think that's probably it's very useful as games investor to have spent a lot of time in these virtual worlds, different genres, understanding the communities, what people like, and these things.
That's interesting, and you have a background actually in business, right? And then you pivoted somehow into the gaming space. I'm wondering, what was the moment for you that was pivotal, that you decided, okay, like this is the industry of the future, and this is something I want to like focus on right now?
Frustratingly, when I ended my university, for me in my country, which is Belgium, gaming is not really a career option. Like no one that I knew ever even considered going to work in games, because there's like zero industry here. So you would have to go abroad. And so it wasn't really an option. And so I went into technology and, worked in a few companies, startups, big corporates, and then ended up in the crypto space. Spent 4 years in that. And then I realized that there was big potential at the intersection of crypto or Web3 and gaming, which was my passion. And so then I took the decision that, hey, finally I can try and make gaming my profession or my career. And it's in this intersection with an industry that I already understand, which was crypto. And so this was 2 years ago that I decided to switch focus from like purely crypto into crypto and games. And yeah, that was probably the best decision that I've made, because I haven't had so much fun in my career yet.
I'm happy you found your passion. Like you can combine many things. I feel like in the Web3 space, you have like a lot of options to combine many passions. And I'm wondering, what are the things that you see when there's apps or games built, like that really make them go off or really fail? Like I would love to know that.
I wish I would be able or could be able to, or I was able to share with you the playbook about how Web3 or crypto is applied best to gaming and what makes it successful. But I think, unfortunately, many of the data points that we have until today are very much brought to us through speculation more than innovative game design and game development processes. And so a few things that I think are first principles and truths is that involving community early on within the game design and development process is becoming more and more important. And so the old game practice of locking yourself up into a room for a few years and building a game, I think we'll see less and less of that moving forward. And so I think that's something that the whole gaming space can learn from what we've seen in Web3 gaming. I also think that we've seen a few companies, but they haven't yet exploded, that have done really innovative and new things using Web3 technologies and applying them to games. But I feel like, and I fear that, especially for mainstream gamers and just the mainstream media, they're overshadowed by Web3 projects that have used the economic speculative loop of Web3 applied to games and have gained notoriety because of that. And so, yeah, I think what I want people to do is realize that, the speculative loop and the whole play to earn narrative, I think, is unsustainable, at least for the next 5 years, and focus on new and innovative ways to use these technologies to games.
Yeah, that's really interesting because when you think of a game growing up, I think of like just having fun or just escaping kind of like reality. You come home from school or whatever, and now it's almost like this other metric of like, okay, we want to earn some NFTs there, we want to like do all these cool things there, and if it's not happening there, we might not be interested in it. I feel like that narrative kind of comes up for me when I think about Web3 gaming right now. And I'm wondering, what kind of areas and trends do you see like at BITKRAFT that you guys are focusing on right now and that you're really, really excited about?
When I look at what Web3 brings to games and what's being built today, I see, broadly speaking, generally speaking, 3 different approaches. The first approach is an existing Web2 game where you change some of the assets or all of the assets within the game. These could be, non-fungible assets, so like characters and weapons, etc. And you turn those into NFTs, or you take some of the in-game currencies and turn those into fungible tokens. And this gives an additional layer, economic deepening of the game and the meta game around it. And this is what I call Web 2.5. It is a Web 2 game loop, like a simple game loop that would be successful without cryptocurrencies or without the use of blockchain technology. But by adding in, the ability for people to take their assets out of the game and then potentially, transact them, it gives an additional layer and additional, value to the user. And so, I call this Web 2.5, and it doesn't mean that these are, bad games or bad companies or bad businesses. That's just like our definition of this. And I think there's going to be, over the next years, a large number of very successful Web 2.5 games. So games that are, just this core loop. This could be just a mobile game that you would play today, but the assets are blockchain powered. So that's the first part, or the first type of game that we see. The next game, or the next opportunity for Web3 applied to games, is deepening existing player-driven economies and making them open instead of closed. So if you look at some of the biggest virtual economies out there, some that come to mind is World of Warcraft or RuneScape, the game that I referred to earlier, or EVE Online. They are mostly closed. There are ways to transact real economic value in and out of the game, but there's some friction there. And so by using blockchain technology, you can build an MMO, like a very big online game, with a player-driven economy that's also open, which means that you allow for players to come in, and if they have a lot of funds, a lot of capital, and they want to skip some grinding to get to that critical mass of money to progress faster, these types of reasoning, that by the way, this happens within normal games or Web 2 games as well. That's solving this through Web3 is a big potential that we see, and we invest in companies that are doing that. So that's the second vertical. And then the third vertical is finding ways in which Web3 technologies can actually fundamentally impact game design, where some of the game logic is partially put or pulled on top of the blockchain. And so one example of this, and this isn't a very extreme example, is that you now have games that are being built completely on the blockchain, where the game logic and the game state remain on chain. And this leads to a bunch of very interesting, potential outcomes, right? The moment you have games that are built on a blockchain, anyone can interact with them. Anyone can build other pieces on them. Anyone can build tools around them to make, the game interact, or to allow players to interact with the game in different way, more easily, etc. And so this is also one area that we look at. That's one that gets me particularly excited, and we also believe has a lot of potential.
I want to quickly talk about the last thing that you mentioned. It seems like that is the most Web3 on decentralized gaming approach that is out there. Isn't there like a challenge with that approach? Because if people come and there's this amazing game that people build for, you can't really build a game over a month or something. You really need from what I know, like games are built over years, right? So if there's a decentralized game, wouldn't that crash the system if people would be building on top? Or how do you protect these kind of like infrastructures within the game?
So in the end, if you look at Ethereum, for example, Ethereum is a very, very basic, very simple computer. But what makes it special is that it is decentralized. And so it is ran by, thousands or millions of nodes all across the world. And so you're right that the moment you want to do too many things on that computer, it starts crashing. It starts, gas prices start skyrocketing. We know that, right? And now things are better. But a year ago during the bear market, I remember paying a lot of money for nothing, to do some stuff with some JPEGs on the internet. I think, investing in this space is, I think, investing in the future of the infrastructure as well. I think, anyone who invests in this space invests keeping in mind that, in a few years, the transaction throughput of these systems are going to be, orders of magnitude higher than they are today. We, for example, invested in a company, in a platform allowing for extremely cheap and fast NFT minting. The company is called Immutable X. They use ZK rollup technology to essentially scale the blockchain, scale the L1 Ethereum. And so, I invest keeping in mind, or imagining a world where transaction costs on the blockchain become very small and transaction speeds become pretty fast. I think, it's a known fact, and I think everyone will agree that a decentralized computer will never be as fast as a centralized computer. But I think with dedicated app-specific blockchains, we will get close. And so I think that we'll likely never see a first-person shooter where you need like these millisecond reaction times. We'll never see that live on the blockchain. But I can very well imagine a more slower game, less twitchy game. An example could be RuneScape. I could see a game like that living on the blockchain, on a very specific blockchain that's made specifically to run that.
We know that you invested into Disco with BITKRAFT, and I want to know, what do you think about like the creative graph building there in this kind of like gaming metaverse, right? We have the graph from like normal Web2 social media apps, like where creators and gamers not necessarily have like ownership of their data, and they can bring around all their friends to different spaces. So I'm wondering how important do you think is this for future creators, gamers, like having ownership of their credentials, their data, and like bringing their values to different ecosystems?
So our thesis behind investing in a company like Disco, which is very much focused on decentralized identity and in general, like virtual identity, is that, as gamers, we realize very well that over time, more and more people will spend more and more time in virtual worlds, right? As technology progresses, right? The story I told you earlier about, how we look at blockchains and how we see them evolve over time has happened with, other technologies as well. And so as technologies advance, as immersiveness and graphical fidelity increase, I think, the draw of virtual worlds will only increase. So what blockchain brings here is, I think, something that was very much needed. And that is, blockchain is a value layer that's native to the internet. Before blockchain, I could not send you an email with an item in it without still keeping it myself. If I send you a picture, you had that picture and I also had that picture, right? With blockchain, there's now this sense of scarcity. And I think, as we spend more and more time in virtual worlds, this sense of scarcity will allow for new innovative business models and incentive design to be built and be created. And I think that it's very hard for us to imagine what that's going to look like. And so, in a lot of these spaces, what we try and do is we look at first principles. Similarly to, I don't know if you know the story, but Jeff Bezos, he started Amazon and he said that people will always want things cheaper and faster. And that's where he built Amazon around. It's all about making it faster to get to the consumer and cheaper to buy. Similarly, we try to think about like a similar approach within these virtual worlds, where giving people more agency and more ownership about who they are and who they want to be is always going to be a good thing, and it's always going to be something that's desirable. And yeah, that's why we invest in projects like Disco.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I also know that you are building something called Fork DAO, and I'm wondering, could you explain a bit about what that is, and also maybe a bit of like, what do you see like is the best thing about the DAO space?
It is a good question. So I'll first tell you why I started it. So one thing that I get to see as an investor is a lot of pitch decks, and over the 1.5 years that I've been investing in this space now, as a institutional investor, I have seen the same mistake made a lot of times. So I still get decks that say, "Oh, we're building a play to earn metaverse," and one of my frustrations is that gaming has always been a sort of new frontier where new technologies can be used and built upon in creative ways. It was one of the first like major use cases for the internet, for 3D technologies, and you can name a bunch of other technologies that were being used, on the edge with gaming. And so similarly, I think there's potential for cryptocurrencies and blockchains to be used within games in really cool ways. But one of my frustrations is that game developers are they're very creative. They're very creative when it comes to game design. And so I see a lot of very experienced games people looking at this new technology, this new, like this Web3 stack, and saying like, I can do something new with that. But then because they're uncertain about how much innovation they want to bring into the game, they tend to default towards this Web 2.5, where they build a game that they understand how to make, and then they take some part of it and put it on blockchain. And that's mostly around ownership and allowing people to, sell their assets or earn a currency while they play, etc. And so I call this a skeuomorphism. So skeuomorphism is a term used for when people apply new technologies to do old things. So an example is the first web pages on the internet. They were essentially like newspapers that you could scroll through. There was no links, like there was no like interactivity. It was nothing. It was just like scrolling through the web pages. And then now, what is it, like 30 years later, we have TikTok and we have Facebook, or that's even gone, right? We have all these new platforms that are just using this new medium to a way better extent to serve our needs. And so I started the Fork DAO because I wanted to bring builders in, people that are building games, and give them inspiration around how they can use these new technologies to do something different, and inspire them to dare to do something new, right? And also, if one makes a mistake, then they can share it with all the others so they don't make the same mistakes again. I think there's a lot of mistakes to be made here. We don't have a playbook, as I already said, and so this is just bringing smart people together, and together building greater and better games. And then with the question about around DAOs, I think what we've done until now is we've called it a DAO, but we've refrained from issuing tokens and having people vote on chain. And the reason for that is that if you have a DAO, like in my specific case, right, we're building a group of builders, smart individuals, but we want the people in the DAO because of who they are, not necessarily for how many tokens they have. And so, if we would issue a fungible token that they could sell through, then, there would be people in the DAO that own a lot of tokens, but they just purchased it and they don't necessarily are the people that we would want there. So we've given our early members NFTs, more specifically soul-bound NFTs, but we still haven't completely figured out how to, turn it into what you would consider a traditional DAO.
Yeah, I think the last part that you just said, I think a lot of DAOs are facing this issue, or how you bring the economic structure in there and how you really translate into like a fully DAO version. But I'm wondering, do you think, like, I yesterday was in the metaverse, actually in like a metaverse space, and was running around and seeing my coworker, and I was like, I can't really jump, I can't really do a lot of things like grab things or say hi to my coworkers. And I was like, I wouldn't hang in this metaverse space if there are no tasks to do, or if my work is not happening there, I'm not gonna hang there. And I'm wondering, do you think like the future is gonna be like DAOs working in the metaverse with, like, for example, these metaverse spaces, or do you think that still needs some time till we get there?
I think there's multiple layers to your question. One, will we work more in virtual worlds? I think the answer is yes. I think, I don't know if you've ever put a Quest 2 on your head. It's pretty impressive, but it's not the 10x improvements that will drive mass adoption. And so I think we're still a few years away from these kick-ass virtual reality headsets. But I think once they get there, more and more people will start working and meeting each other and hanging out in these virtual worlds. I'll give you one example. I have regular catch-ups with colleagues, and we've started doing those in a game called Walkabout Mini Golf in VR. So we're both each in our room or even in groups, and we're just playing mini golf. As in the past, people would go play golf to have meetings, and people still do, obviously. But that's what we do now, and it's really fun. And so yes, so people will spend more and more time working in these virtual worlds. I also think that like the metaverse, whatever that ends up being and looking like there's going to be a enormous amount of economic activity in there, meaning that I think at some point more than half of the people in the world will earn a significant chunk of their income within these virtual worlds. It's hard for me to put a time frame on there, but I do know that Web3 will be foundational to make that happen. And then your next question was around DAOs and work. And here I think I see a move away from the traditional way of working, where you have one job and it's a 9 to 5, and you have like one responsibility and you have a boss and they tell you what to do. I think we're more and more moving towards project-based work, where you do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you won't have one job. Like I have multiple jobs myself. I'm building this DAO. I'm doing a podcast, but also I'm also a VC investor, and I love all of it, right? And I think through more flexible ways of distributing value and incentivizing people, we will see like a shift in the way that people work.
Yeah, you described it like perfectly. I see this with my friends, I see this with colleagues, like everyone is kind of like doing like some sort of side quest or things that they're passionate about besides their actual job, and have all these different interests. So let's get into the business side. I want to know from you, what is, like, you look at an investment deal and you're like, this is like my perfect investment deal, I'm gonna go for this. Like, what are the kind of like, okay, like I want to go for this investment deal?
I would say that the most critical part of any investment is the people that are executing on it, right? A fantastic team with a good idea is always better, or will always, for us at least, be more likely to get an investment than a good team with a fantastic idea. And so that is always, part number one. If that is in place, I would say that the strongest pitch within Web3 gaming that you can make, to me personally, is a proven and super high quality team that comes to me, that tells me, look, I have built a successful business doing a certain thing. Now, and doing that, I managed to make it successful, but I had these and these problems. Now, with Web3 technology, these problems are actually solved. And so I believe that I can, build this business that I know, but way better, because now a lot of the problems that I faced are taken away or are solved by this new technology. I think that's probably like the strongest pitch you can make to me.
Okay, so kind of like already have a proven kind of structure. You already see like the potential. Okay, there's like just a bit of tweaking or a bit of investment, and this can really like be something different. Or how would you describe it?
As much as a safe bet as possible, that's what we investors really like. Obviously, that never exists, right? There's always risk, because if there was no risk, then everyone would be doing this. But I would say that's the perfect investment. That being said, I think it is a completely viable strategy, and probably from a return on investment or a risk reward perspective, might be even a better strategy to bet on problems that you're not 100% sure need to be solved that badly. So this concept of building games on chain, for example, it is something that there's a world where this becomes a very, very niche thing that maybe 10,000 players across the whole world play at max, right? But there's also a world where that turns into, a new gaming paradigm. And so these are, things that no one knows, but these are the bets that are the most exciting.
And I think we touched on so many great things, but like to close up this conversation, I want to know, like, gaming enthusiasts and gamers, early developers, like, what do you think? How can they make a change, or how can they get involved? I know you said don't repeat kind of like the old structures just into the new. So I'm wondering, from your perspectives, like, what are the steps that early startup founders and gamers can do to really like get a head start in this space?
It's a good question. I would say that I get excited when a team comes to me with an idea for a game where the game would not work at all if blockchain didn't exist, like without the blockchain or without Web3 technology. If you can build a game that says like, oh, this must be an NFT, otherwise this wouldn't work, that's really cool to me, because that's not skeuomorphic. And so it's, I guess, but for that you have to be creative, and you probably have to iterate. And so there's unfortunately still no one playbook. But I would say that there's a lot of mistakes that haven't made before. So if you do a bit of research, I'm pretty sure you can already avoid many of those, and either make your own mistakes or find something really cool that's has a lot of potential.
And maybe join a DAO or a group of gamers who you can learn from as well. I think that's like, looking at, like you said, looking at other projects, like games that are already out there and things that maybe failed, or like, I think that's really important, and building kind of like a strong community around you, that you can ask questions and things like that.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Nico. Like, this was so insightful. I think we learned so much about gaming, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in today's episode. And yeah, we're gonna link all of the socials down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you, Nico, and I'm excited to see what else kind of games you come up with and investments.
Thank you for having me.